Hi, hello, welcome back. My name is Devraj and welcome back to this series on bioenergetics and related body-based therapy. To kafat or not to kafat? That is a question that's on the minds of some of my clients or people that are generally interested in the scene. You know, is it beneficial to scream and shout in therapy, to really put your emotions out, whether it's, anger, rage, really letting it out, or whether it's the other side, crying, really weeping deep. Is this beneficial or is it counterproductive in some way, or what's the truth of the whole thing? And just looking, it's an interesting question. And, looking back historically, body-based therapy, working with the body, working with emotions directly, came mostly in the West from Wilhelm Reich and his work in the 20s, 30s, 40s in Europe and the USA, later in the USA. And then, you had guys like Alexander Lowen had quite a lot of time for catharsis, pillow bashing and shouting and this kind of thing. A chap called Arthur Yanov came along and wrote a very famous book called Primal Scream, or The Primal Scream, I think in the 70s, maybe 80s. And he was very pro-catharsis. He has a story, if I recall, of a young man screaming and letting out a big rage in a one-to-one session. And the guy was kind of completely healed afterwards. Anyway. And then a little bit later down the line, I noticed, there's a few people that came along who were in this scene, whether it was working with trauma or just generally working in the alternative therapy scene, as it was the kind of underground or more exploratory end of therapy, away from mainstream mind-based psychotherapy, who were a bit more down on catharsis or dismissive of catharsis. Frank Natali was a famous, no longer with us, famous guy who pioneered bringing shamanic techniques to the West. Trance dance, working with ayahuasca, the plant medicine, and he was not so keen on catharsis. He felt emotions should be more kept in and transmuted into energy, as I understand his work. I never met Frank, but I know some people who were working with him for quite a while. Also later on in the 90s, a quite well-respected chap called Peter Levine in America, who developed a technique called somatic experiencing, working particularly with trauma and particularly with traumatic events that happened after early childhood, was quite down on catharsis. In fact, very negative about it, and believed that you could be re-traumatized, or that it would lock certain thought patterns that you'd then believe were confirmed memories or something in your brain. Something I never really fully understood, really how that was meant to happen, but perhaps if you dressed catharsis up a certain way, it could, so fair enough. So, what's the truth of the matter? I don't know what the truth of the matter is, but I can put my own opinion out. I did 10, 12 years of catharsis on a weekly, almost daily basis. I worked 10 years as a therapist. I've done years and years of bioenergetics also. And bioenergetics is a far less cathartic technique. It is not really relying on catharsis as its central proposed mechanism of releasing the past. A few of the exercises I use are cathartic. They have elements of screaming and shouting and putting it out in them, but a lot of it does not have cathartic elements. In fact, the overwhelming majority of it does not have cathartic elements. So what is the truth? My opinion is that catharsis can be useful, but it's important not to over-rely on it or overstate its use. If you've been following, for example, this series on character structure that I've been doing, and character analysis, which was the work of Wilhelm Reich and later Alexander Lowen, then catharsis can be very useful to break through your body armor, to break through your personality if it's held in a tight box. And let's face it, most people's personalities are held in a fairly tight box. Being able to put anger out fully can break through that, particularly if you've suppressed it a lot in the past. And also being able to put anger out fully often opens up a channel where, more vulnerable, sad feelings can come, where you can cry and start to really release. And certainly on a level of having a social personality, if you're blocked off from one of those poles of emotion, it's probably going to make your social personality a bit dysfunctional at some point, particularly if you want to go deeper in relationships. If you can't really access your emotions on a deep level and talk about your emotions on a deep level, probably your relationships are going to be a bit superficial, in my opinion. So, catharsis is clearly a value there. Breaking through a gap, or rather breaking through a kind of wall inside of yourself when you've had a very tightly boundaried personality, being able to really go into feelings and let go is very beneficial. It frees your energy up. However, there are caveats. You know, people can rely on emotional expression and catharsis, and actually it probably is not releasing at a really deep level. What I also see is a lot of confusion comes about quite naturally because, you know, as I say, a normal person out there living in the world and feelings are building up. Maybe you've had trauma or stuff's happened in the past, stuff has happened and feelings are building up, and often, very often I have clients come to me or email me or message me and say, you know, I just feel like if I could really scream it out or if I could really break down and cry, then all my problems will be over. And of course, inside the psyche of a pent-up person whose emotions are pent up, that will seem realistic and a likely outcome. It is extremely unlikely to be true. Extremely unlikely to be true in my years of working in this scene. But of course, I can understand why people would feel like that. And then, of course, if you come to a session and you do have a really good scream and a good cry and a release, you do feel cleansed and cleared out for a while. But of course, within a few days, usually all the old pressure will build up again because your mind simply goes back, or at least 95% back, to its old patterns of activity. And those patterns of activity and your thinking and behavior simply reinforce, they bring back in all the old holding that you had before. And so you have the option to keep on doing catharsis on a weekly basis and releasing, or you can start to look at something like bioenergetics, which is essentially draining the charge out of a muscle system. You know, when we are being traumatized or when we're ongoingly holding emotions in, there's a kind of, we are somewhere binding energy into our muscles at some level. Sometimes on the surface, and you see people who are very armored and obviously kind of like, you know, ready to kick off at any moment, a bit of a time bomb. Other people, their affect, or to use a more modern word there, how they present themselves, you know, is much more loose, you know, but often there is a lot of binding deeper in the muscle system, but the surface is clear. And until you've got that charge out of the system, until you've got rid of that binding and you've freed your energy up out of being held like that, and you can just use it to do what you want to do with it, hopefully something positive. Until you've done that, then inevitably, you know, you're going to be caught up in this release, if you are doing catharsis, charging energy out, energy building up, charging energy out, energy building up inside, you know. And so what I'm trying to say is that catharsis is useful, but it is by no means a panacea or an end point. You know, it allows for some histrionics, it allows for some exciting group room stuff. You know, there in the group room, surrounded by people, having to scream your guts out, this kind of thing. It's exciting. You know, it feeds your adrenal circuits. You do get a release. You do feel close. You go into intense emotions. You know, you may break down and cry for the first time in a decade. You know, it's great. It's great stuff. But of itself, the real release is a slower thing. It's a slower thing. You know, it happens over time by slowly opening up the muscle groups and draining the muscles of the charge. And that won't easily happen through catharsis in my experience. It won't usually happen. You'll be left discharging and building, and you anyway will to a degree. As you develop more awareness of your body and more self-awareness generally of what triggers you and this kind of thing and where it points to, you anyway become more sensitive, and that is good. But also, of course, you know, you anyway feel more deeply, even more layers of what's going on inside of you. So, you know, this is my opinion of catharsis. It is useful. It is useful to be able to scream and shout and put it out, but it is not an end in itself, or is unlikely to be for most people. You know, if you simply want to get a slightly more whole personality, then being able to access anger easily and feel confident about how you put it out and not scared of it, you know, this is very useful. And also, you know, if you've been very tough guy kind of mode and you can't really cry and let go, then of course being able to cry is very, very useful. But if you're looking for a deeper release over time, then catharsis of itself probably won't work. Another question just to address whilst we're on this subject is that why is it that some people are so adamant that catharsis is the only way and some people are so adamant that catharsis is not very good? My opinion is because they haven't really cleared so much of their own stuff, to be quite honest. There certainly are classes of therapists and trainers out there, some who are very locked into the yang side, the very archetypal male side, that you've always got to be putting energy out and taking a position, and those guys, and plenty of therapists, no one is really clear, I mean, no one on the planet, therapists regardless. And so those guys may still be really locked into that whole way of seeing things, and they can't necessarily access their own vulnerability adequately, and they're pushing it away. And likewise, there certainly are a lot of therapists around who work on the soft side, the yin side of things, who, they can't really bear to really go into the animal rage. They don't go there. And so they have an investment in creating theories or models in which it is seen as not good or not the right thing to do, or in some way counterproductive. They don't have an open belly to throat channel. It's closed for them, and they're much more mind reliant. And the reality is that there are all different clients or workshop participants, if you're running workshops, and they have different needs. Some will absolutely benefit from catharsis. For others, catharsis may be too much, or maybe, not useful for them at all, So, and when I say not useful, what I mean is it may be too much for them, or it may simply send them into a pattern of behavior that doesn't really allow a deeper release. But I'm certainly grateful for the years that I did catharsis, and grateful that I can carry on working with myself, on myself. So I hope this little talk has been useful. Do feel free to put down your own opinions. Generally, I am quite skeptical in therapy, working with the body, of people who are adamant that this way is the only way. Usually those people have not healed themselves very deeply themselves. And that doesn't mean they can't be very good therapists. They can maybe massively help certain class of other people out there, but in terms of really their own depth of awareness and their own power and vulnerability, they're probably lacking a bit somewhere. Okay. Thank you very much for listening. Feel free to like and subscribe. Check out Bioenergetics for Journey if you want to get involved in a really deep, long-term journey with bioenergetics, and check out my workshops too. I will speak to you guys later. Thank you.